Now for a quick Devar Torah. This week's Parsha, Jethro, is an interesting Parsha because it has the fundamental, basically, if you will, a sort of a creed of Judaism. The Esra Debrot, the Ten Commandments, is in this week's Parsha. But what's interesting, it starts off introduce, uh, reintroducing us to Jethro, or Jethro. He's a non-Jew. He comes to see, and he decides that he's going to be part of the Jewish people. He sees what's happening, but then he has some constructive criticism to Moshe. What's the constructive criticism? He sees that Moshe is judging people morning to night. He's doing all this stuff. And he says, Moshe, you're going to burn yourself out. That's problem number one. Number two, you're not training the next generation. What's going to happen when you're no longer the leader? These are things that you have to think about. And Moshe listens. And what does he do? He says, okay, he accepts the criticism and he accepts how Jethro wants to set things up, is to have courts, lower courts, and that slowly, if there's a problem too big for the lower courts, it'll eventually get to Moshe. But he's not going to concern himself with the really small details. He's going to concern himself with the major issues. Much like, say, here in the United States, how the court system works, you have lower courts, and then if something is really an important matter, it'll eventually make its way up to the Supreme Court. And what's also interesting, before we get to Sinai, we set up a court system. I know there's a whole debate as to when did Jethro come, was it before Mount Sinai, after Mount Sinai? That's a whole issue in of itself. But the Torah is by putting this before Mount Sinai, is making a statement that you can be very spiritual, but you need structure to that spirituality. Without the structure, it doesn't work. It'll break down. Because what will happen is this person's spiritual in this way, that in that way, and society just falls apart. You need structure to society. You need a basis. You need a court system. Remember, if you go back to the story of the flood and the 7 laws given to Noah, there are 6 don'ts, and the one positive commandment given to all of mankind is set up a court system, because you need that structure for society. So this is why Jethro's idea of setting up courts to bring forth the Torah comes first. Now we can go to Mount Sinai and get the real spirituality. But again, without that structure, nothing else works. It all breaks down. And we see this, by the way, in our daily lives. We see how people say, who are you to tell me, blah, 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 blah. Well, it's the law, and that's the way it goes. I'm not going to make any comments about certain things going forward, but here in the United States, you have you have the fact that the U.S. Constitution supersedes all other constitutions throughout the United States. And also, something else we see in this week's Parsha, Moshe has to delegate. The most successful presidents the U.S. has had were all men who could delegate, who could say, this is my power, but I can't do it all. I need to pass it on. And that way they also train the next generation. Something to think about.